You're listening to The Bon Ray Show. It's 8 in the evening. Tune in every night at 8 to listen to The Bon Ray Show on Irish News Radio or itv.ie. And you can contact anything that you've heard or if anything you'd like to discuss at news@irishnews. Bon Ray Show on itv.ie and Irish News Radio. Today is Thursday, so we will be talking about the EU and the mess of it. As I was saying, I feel sometimes I go through complete fear and sick in the stomach, absolutely terrified of what's coming our way. Other times I go through an extreme anger, feeling that majority of people have no idea and don't seem to care. And other times I go through nearly breaking out in tears of sadness of what we are going to lose. So I go through those emotions, but we will go through what's happening in the EU, the little UN. And as I was saying last week, I'm calling it taken. Our country has been taken. But not just our country. The whole of the Europeans under Germany and France, but the main leader is Germany again. They went on about fear-mongering this army would never happen, and it's very much on its way. If you have a thing that the Irish government would like to say, oh, the English will really regret Brexit, la da 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 da. £1 billion investment backs Brexit from the UCB drug makers, a Belgian drug makers throwing its support behind Britain as it leaves the EU. The USB on Wednesday says it will invest in 150 million to 200 million in purpose-built research centres, a decision that will support 650 jobs. So much for doom and regret on the British, far from that. As we become very much Christmas becoming a non-Christian time, they're going to start calling it holidays to keep the migrants that they are flooding into our countries happy. Holiday seasons, everything will become non-Christian, and then to eventually we will not be allowed to celebrate Christmas, and that is coming our way too. But before that there will be many killings and many more things, but that is on our way, and that's the road we are on. An Irish councillor was crucified for saying that Ireland should be first in Irish should be first in Ireland. That's just typical of the way that the Irish have to be put back. The new Irish, which have nothing to do with Ireland, that we are being flooded with, are supposed to be put first. If anybody hasn't read Agenda 21, read it. It's all about divide, dumb down the nation, and conquer, and we're very much on the way to that. Right, we're going to talk about Merkel's EU army. Now, if you don't know, she has said she's going to step down, but she's been taken, and she will be taken the big job. The drunk will be stepping down, and Merkel, who has destroyed Europe, who should be locked up in prison for mass murder and mass rapes on Europe, who has destroyed a whole continent and many, many lives, has got the top job. Now, if she's done that while as a German chancellor, can you imagine what she's going to do for the European continent? It is quite scary. An American man, David Archibald, writes about it from an American thinker. He writes, the army will kill other Europeans if necessary. It will loosen its ties with American army, with the US. Countries where the EU has not got its jumping to their tune, like Hungary, Poland, Italy, Austria. The MM team, Germany and France, Merkel and Maroon, the EU army will fight. And who will it fight? It's not going to fight Russia, as Russian army would wipe them out. It's to keep the empire together. So it's to fight other Europeans. So Brussels remains in charge, flooding Europe with Africans, 150 million to 200. And they're not just an army, they're going to be a navy and an air force. Countries who they will be fighting against are countries who have begun to stand up to the EU and have refused to sign this suicidal pact by the UN, which is basically give up your country and give up your lives to the UN while they flood your country with migrants from the third world who will kill you, who do not come from a civilized culture, who will kill you and rape your daughters, and you will be digging your children out of ditches, and at the same time you will be criminalized to talk about your gang rape of your children or the death of your wife or your sister as you dig them out of ditches and you put them in graves. If you even think about talking about it in a negatively way, you will be criminalized. So countries that are beginning to stand up, good old Hungary, a fantastic leader, probably the best, and hopefully will be the savior of Europe. These are beginning to grow. Poland, another fantastic, has said no, they will not put on. Switzerland, which isn't in the EU zone, lucky them, has said they will not sign it. Austria, which has an amazing young leader, fantastic, who will put Austrians first. The Czech Republic says no. Bulgaria, Croatia and Lithuania, the newest one. Now, the UK and Ireland will sign, so we are completely finished. But the UK, once Theresa May, they get her out, that paperwork for the UN is not legally binding. They will come out of it too, which will mean that the Irish, because of a traitorous government, will definitely stay in it, which means that the war and the tension, and there will be war in Europe, the Irish will be put against the British, and that is coming very soon. But thankfully, the Americans have woken up, and as much as we have a dumb leader and treacherous government, Fianna Fáil, Fine Gael and Sinn Féin are all criminals and all should be put against the wall and shot. The Americans know the Irish citizens, and we have been in their armies. They're not that stupid. They will allow the Irish to join their army. Hopefully. I'm hoping that this is what happens, because the Americans will put a stop to it, I believe. Now, what stage they'll put a stop to it, I don't know. Now, I think it'll be done like that. They will decide to they will either make Ireland another state or partly of a state, and then use Ireland as a military base so they can come and go as they like, to control the EU and their stupid EU army, which is mainly going to kill other Europeans. The Americans aren't under threat because they know it's a joke of an army, that there's only a few countries that will do it. It's mainly to kill other Europeans. So the Americans will probably, at what stage, I don't know, will have to step in. So the easier way of stepping in without getting involved in war will either make the Irish part of the American army or make the whole of Ireland part of a military base, because of where it's positioned, and it would shut up the EU straight away and stop it in its tracks. And that would be very easy for the Americans, because of the Irish links, to be able to do that overnight, which would stop the EU. But at what stage the Americans will get involved in this madness, and having to stop this madness, sorry, not getting involved, having to put a stop, because it will be the Americans who will have to put a stop to this madness of this EU destruction of every European country. And that is our only hope. If America doesn't step in yet again, we're gone. And we should all be grateful for the Americans, because as the French president says, we'll have an EU army for, against Americans. As if the Americans would even be a fear. What a stupid. So the Americans know that this EU army is going to happen, but they're not going to be a threat because they're too small and the Americans would wipe them out. So it will be, the Russians won't be a threat either, won't be under threat either, because again, the big bear would be able to wipe them out in a minute. It will be countries like Hungary, as I said, Austria, Czech Republic, Bulgaria, Croatia, Hungary, people who have a backbone. So the Americans will have to step in because they're the only ones who will. I don't know whether Russia would step in, but looking at Putin, actually, he stepped in for the white Americans, or the white South Africans, to take them out and bring them to Russia when they were being killed by the Africans. So possibly, I don't know. I can't see it. I think it's too far. But hopefully it'll be the Americans, because it'll be easier for the Americans because they have links with Ireland to make it part of the American army and make Ireland part of its army base. Just make it a whole army base to stop the EU destroying these Europeans. That's what I'm hoping. I can't see Russia because Russia hasn't really got any links with Europe, particularly Western, so it doesn't really have any culture kind of understanding where America does. Australia, no, it's too far. If it has any links, it would probably be with the British. Whether they do something eventually, maybe. But the Americans would be more linked with the Irish and not a treacherous government. So we will see. Well, that's what I'm hoping. Other than that, we're heading for, our country is gone anyway with the UN Pact, and our treacherous government will sign it, and will be the end of Ireland. And we will be in the army because our treacherous government have signed it. So whether we will be fighting each other on the border to antagonise the British, I don't know where that is going to lead us, but the EU will put on a border anyway to antagonise the British. There will be having to be, or the British may even have to, because by the time we are so badly flooded, the British will not be able to hold up, because we will have so many African from third world countries in here that they have a serious amount of their own problems. They will not be able to keep the border open with the amount of flooding that will happen, and the Irish trying to get out themselves from this wave of immigrants that will come in, because our lives will be so bad, so in danger, particularly if you female children, that most Irish will flood out to Northern Ireland to try and get to the UK, although a lot of the UK, it has had, like they say, over 1 million, some people say 2 to 3 million of children gang raped in the United Kingdom. But at least with the Brexit, they have hope of going forward and stopping it. Unfortunately, we're only on the journey, and already the gang rapes are happening here in Ireland, but they're just not being talked about. They're very much under the carpet, but they are happening. And as this UN Pact happens, you will be seeing us picking our dead out of the graves, and they will be mainly females, because most of these migrants are men, young men, that come from cultures that have no respect or life value on women. So a lot of them, their women are killed, particularly in abortions. That's why this abortion thing was so important to bring in. They come from countries where the crime rate is so high because the female population is low, because they kill them because they have no value. It's scary days. The EU is all about breaking down nation states. They don't even hide that anymore, destroying our sovereignty and our culture through massive third world immigration and attacking Western traditions. These are all very, very obvious. Like, you would have to be blind not to see what is happening in every European country. The future belongs to the Germans, and that's the truth. Germany will take over. And that has already happened. But now anybody speaking out will be criminalised. Once Europe is the head of, once Germany is the head of Europe, then the bigger brother takes over that, which is the UN, which probably is behind Saudi, which is Saudi and the Germans together, which is Islam and Germans together as they were in World War One and World War Two. Nothing changes. It's the problem with history, as many people have said it, if you don't know history, you're condemned to repeat it. World War One, the Ottoman Empire was backed by Germany. World War Two had many Islamic leaders in it, and that's where the hatred of the Jews, even Hitler said the only religion he respected was Islam. And if you see now in Ireland the amount of anti-Israel, anti-Jewish people who believe that the Jewish are behind this and it's behind, you know, I definitely believe it's behind the banks, and Islam Saudi is behind it, and corruption. But I cannot see a link to the Jewish. But there are so many people who believe that. For me, it just reminds me of World War One, World War Two, and yet people will talk about the Jewish doing this, but you don't see anything. They don't, but they at the same time will not talk about the gang rapes of the children, the murders, the mass murders that's happening in Europe because of Islam. But yet they constantly talk about this fictionally, the Israel being behind all this. And they're very convinced that. Now, maybe I don't know, I can't see that link, and maybe that is a link, I haven't seen it yet. But it worries me more that they don't talk about the mass raping of children through the Islamic and the murder. And that what frightens me more is that the everyday lives of everyday people in Europe are being killed because of Islam and being raped because of a culture. And that they don't seem to worry about. They seem to think, oh, that's okay. Let's talk about the Jewish behind it all. They didn't write the Quran, and they didn't force these men to rape these children, even if Israel or whatever is behind it. Islam is the one that's doing all the raping and murdering. Don't see a bunch of Jewish driving trucks into a bunch of people and killing them, or dismembering their bodies in some French concert, or blowing up children. It is always Muslims. And that is where I think we should focus on. What we can see is that Muslims, follow the money, absolutely. But the main thing is that the children's lives are being killed and gang raped. Their lives and women's lives are being destroyed. So let's follow the deaths, I think, is the first thing to follow. It's very scary. It's all the EU army is to keep us in line. The governments lied and have rigged the votes to keep us in it. Told us it was to do with trade. They have lied constantly. It's to do with takeover and destruction of our culture and our sovereignty, our neutrality, and everything that is important to the Irish people, our heritage. Everything. It's to destroy and impose a new law, economic. And it's for Europe, and it's not for Ireland's benefits. They have these smoke screens of these bullshit referendums, which they rig the votes anyway for. Our fishing has been destroyed. Our farming's been destroyed. Our economic has been destroyed. Yet they go on about how we're doing well. There's 10,000 homeless. Our healthcare is in crisis. How could we be doing well? This has all been built on sand, and they lie and lie and lie. It is absolutely incredible, and the army is for German control. They have already threatened to remove the EU Commission for voting rights. they're more worried about what they think the right-wing countries, and that's who they will go after. Once this army, it's German control. How long before the countries that they will go after countries like Poland, Hungary that are speaking out and they're well able to stand up for them? And who will they use for this stupid army? The Irish. That is why I am praying that the Americans do step in and hire the Irish. Say, Irish, we have a link, you can join the American army. That will stop this bullshit army. Because, to be honest, we will be killed. And the EU would love that. We'll be wiped out from any decent army of Hungary, Poland, and then this bullshit EU army. Those countries come from war. They would be well able to take on any bullshit countries like England and Ireland and Western countries that have been civilized pretty much. Well, not the English army, the British army's quite, but that won't be in the EU. It won't be in the EU army as they're leaving, thankfully for them. So it'll be the Irish, the French, the Germans. That is a recipe for fucking disaster. The French and the Germans together. And the Irish without a heart. Like, the Irish have only ever fought for their own country. This is not, and they fight with heart. There's nothing to fight for. The EU, a company. Insane. So I am praying that the Americans do intervene and put that the Irish can join the American army. Because once the Irish are out, it's just the Americans and French together, which is a joke. And that's why they are flooding us with Africans. But imagine, threatened to remove the EU Commission of Voting Rights. So they're even threatening to take our voting rights away. Not that their voting rights actually matter. I'm convinced they're all rigged anyway. They are all rigged, and they have just been very careless, like to be caught a few times already. So it's scary days ahead of us. But also what has been else happening is the Yellow Jacket protests are now going into Amsterdam. Even the bloody hippies in Amsterdam who mostly smoke bloody, they're even waking up. This is how bad it is. Denmark have a Christmas affair event, and it gets attacked by Antifa, disturbs it, because it's Christian, of course, Antifa, and they're mad. Finland girls have been abused by migrant men like the rest of Europe. The police giving out warnings. Statistics show that all of them are Muslim migrants. Rapes and sexual abuses score high, like they've never seen in Finland before. Some have received Finnish citizenship or awaiting refugee status and asylum. The police warn to be careful and to watch your children. This is the state of Europe because of the EU. As I said at the beginning of this, sometimes I feel fear, sometimes I feel anger, sometimes I feel intense sadness. And the fact is that majority of the Irish are asleep as the rest are waking up. Thankfully, for the countries that have said no to the UN Pact, which is completely dangerous, which is Hungary, Poland, Switzerland, which is not in, it's in Europe, the continent, even though the EU likes to claim Europe as its own. Thankfully, Switzerland is not in the EU, it is in Europe. Austria, the Czech Republic, Bulgaria, Croatia, and Lithuania have all said no. The UK will sign it from treacherous May, but the only good thing is it's not illegally abiding. As soon as they get a decent Prime Minister for the UK, they could be safe. They just need to start kicking out migrants. They have to work that out, because unfortunately a lot of theirs were Muslims, and they've been there not just one generation, 3 generations. And actually, the ones now, 3 or 4 generations, are more dangerous than when they first came over. Because, like, as with Islam, once they become a majority, that's when they become a danger. So you see towns completely Islamic with Sharia law, Sharia courts, the UK police not doing anything. In fact, a lot of the UK police now are Muslims. You have Muslims in mayors, in government. You have a complete and dumbing down of the British, and they have allowed it happen. Now, thankfully, a lot of the British have woken up, and that's why Brexit has happened. And you will see, the good thing about the British is they will fight for their country. They didn't fight 2 wars to let Germany take over now, and that's what it is. Through this Islamic third world invasion into Europe. Thank you for listening on the Bonnery Show on Thursday, where we were talking about the EU and the destruction of Europe. Thankfully, Lithuania, a new country that came on board the no to the UN Pact. We will see in the next few days unfolding if there's any more European countries that wake up and say no to keep the continent of Europe safe. Scary times, sad times, and an uncertain future ahead of us through the EU. Definitely some sort of war if this is not stopped. As I think the only hope we have is the Americans intervening and saying no, and either allowing the Irish join the American army, which majority of Irish would sign up to, rather than this bullshit PESCO, and allowing the Irish to emigrate to America, making it another state and making the Americans allowed. That would just make Ireland part of America, would stop this bullshit European project dead in its tracks. Because if it doesn't have England, doesn't have Ireland, it only has France and Germany, and they will fall together because the Eastern Europeans have already said no, they're not taking any part, they won't take any crap. So it's only that will continue. And with Ireland out and the UK out, I do believe that it will fall apart. So, especially if America is in Europe, and that, by putting their foot on Ireland, would be fantastic, because that means it would be no-go. PESCO would have no life and no chance to grow if America makes Ireland a state, and that is what I'm praying for, because it's a dangerous situation, and that they stop. What they can do is everybody who's got a passport in the 10 years who are not actually Irish, of Irish heritage, they can just cancel if they make it a state and say, no, we're not taking anybody unless you're fully fledged Irish, unless you're genuine refugee, either you're a Christian from an Islamic state, or that you're white African, or that you're real, not from Islamic and not from third world countries that weren't even in a war. That we will refuse to take any of those, and that anybody with an Irish citizenship or passport has to give it back unless you're truly Irish. That it could easily be solved, but it needs America to solve Ireland, and I do believe if Ireland is solved and safe, the EU will not continue, because America is too big. Thank you for listening on the Bonnery Show. We'll see how this progresses over the next few days with this madness UN deal. Thank you for listening on the Bonnery Show. You're listening to the Bonnery Show on ITV.ie and Irish News Radio. Today is Thursday, so we're talking about the mess and the destruction of Europe because of the EU and the UN. Just an interesting statistic there. I was reading from the Eurostats that the safest countries in Europe are the ones that barely took any refugees. What is some Surprise, surprise, surprise. And that comes from the Eurostat office. So Croatia, Slovakia, and Hungary and Poland are the safest countries. None of them were plagued by grooming gangs, Islamic attacks, or no-zone areas. And no surprise, the countries that took in huge numbers of Islamic refugees from North Africa and the Middle East are the ones who are the most dangerous countries today. Although Croatia took in and Poland took in certain countries from other refugees like Ukraine, they're still very, very safe. It's only the countries that took in North African and Islamic countries in the Middle East are the most dangerous now in Europe. Scary times. Thank you for listening on the Bon Rie Show. As if anybody should be surprised by this, but it's actually interesting that they're even putting it down in Eurostats with the control of Germany and France wanting it all to go away. And when this UN deal is signed, nobody, unless you live in one of those lovely countries, lucky things like Croatia, Poland, Hungary, Slovakia, you will be allowed to speak about this. If you live Ireland, the UK, or any of the other countries that are going to speak about it, you will be criminalised. Time to think about packing all our bags. Because while this goes ahead, if we stay here, it is very hard. It'll be very hard to live in a country that if you aren't allowed to talk about your dead children being raped, or your wife, or your sister, or your mother, murdered. If you talk about it, you are the criminal, not the one who has killed, raped, murdered your women. And believe me, they come with the most hate for women. And it's women who will pay this huge price. The stupid leftist feminazis and the leftist bloody idiots in government who've brought this. A majority of them, particularly in government, know exactly what they're doing. They've all got their good jobs in Brussels. They don't care about the Irish, particularly the Irish women. And a lot of them aren't even Irish, like Zapone and Leo. They don't care about the Irish. They don't care about our culture, our heritage. Sad days ahead, very frightening, and sad days are coming, and coming quicker than we can talk. Each week brings a new set of dangers to us. Thank you for listening on the Bon Rie Show.
You are listening to Irish News Radio at irishnews.net. Email news@irishnews.net.